Hi, I'm Barry Huff. Welcome back to another podcast on the Lord's Prayer. Thy kingdom come. When Jesus talks about God's kingdom, he isn't talking about a place where God sits on a throne. Instead, he's talking actually about the activity of God's governing. Mary Baker Eddy picks up on this active meaning of God's kingdom in her daily prayer, interpreting the phrase, thy kingdom come, as, let the reign of divine truth, life, and love be established in me. In the Bible, there are lots of examples of parallelism, which is when two phrases that explore a similar idea appear back to back, adding on to the meaning of each other. The two phrases, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven, may be an example of parallelism in which Jesus defines God's kingdom as come, when God's will is done in earth as it is in heaven. Sometimes when I pray, I actually catch myself trying to get God to do my will. But Jesus instructs us to pray, thy will be done. Not, God, I'll do whatever you want, as long as it's option A, B, or C. And not, thy will be done my way. On the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton asked President Lincoln, Mr. President, should we kneel and pray that in tomorrow's battle, God would be on our side? President Lincoln said, heaven forbid, but rather we should kneel and pray that we would be on God's side. Lincoln knew that God answers the right kind of knee mail. More recently, another politician also captured the spirit of praying, thy will be done, by warning of the danger when people of faith seek to use God, rather than be used by God. As Harry Emerson Fosdick put it, God isn't a cosmic bellboy for whom we can press a button to get things done. So this prayer encourages us to stop coming to God with our wish lists and to start asking, how can we serve God? But this doesn't have to be a burdensome prayer. Paul shows us one way to live this prayer in 1 Thessalonians when he says, rejoice evermore, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God. Amen. The will of God is that we give thanks and rejoice. This is what Paul describes as unceasing prayer. This sheds light on Jesus' statement about entering the closet. It doesn't mean locking ourselves in a dark room all day meditating, because Paul defines unceasing prayer as rejoicing, always giving thanks. We can rejoice when we're doing God's will, because God's will for us is always good. As Shirley Guthrie puts it, belief in the sovereignty of God does not mean accepting our own or others' suffering or death as the will of God. It means outrage and protest at what a loving God does not will and will not tolerate. So thy will be done doesn't mean squashing our individuality or accepting whatever happens as the will of God. In the earliest Greek manuscripts of the Lord's Prayer, the petition, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, appears only in Matthew, not in Luke. Which is interesting because only in Matthew does Jesus pray these words in Gethsemane, thy will be done. As Jesus' example shows, if we're going to pray, thy will be done, we have to be willing to carry the cross. Now, compare the three petitions we've just studied. Hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, with the Kaddish, a first-century prayer that is still recited at the end of synagogue services. Exalted and hallowed be his great name in the world which he has created according to his will. May his kingdom come speedily and soon. The start of the Lord's Prayer is very similar to the Kaddish and to David's prayer in 1 Chronicles 29. But what follows from here on out are four unique petitions relating specifically to our needs. A list of the sources I used when preparing these podcasts can be found on tmcyouth.com.
This podcast is produced and copyrighted by the First Church of Christ Scientists in Boston.